Welcome to the studio. What you're looking at is a study that I did just before doing the rocks and rocky beach painting tutorial. And it didn't start out to be this scene, it just started out to be this rock and whatnot. I was just going to paint some trees and all that, and it was just going to be a very good warm-up, and it never meant to have a river in the middle of it, and it was never meant to be a finished painting. It was meant to be a study and just a warm-up exercise, and then I went on to film that tutorial, so it really helped out. But today what we're going to do is look at common mistakes and fixes. Using the wrong brush, big or small, the types of brushes, you know, round, square, riggers, mashed old brushes to do trees. You know, we're looking at watercolor mistakes, too dry, too wet, bleeds when you want a crisp line and it bleeds into the area you don't want to, and we'll fix that. And unwanted splatter, the wrong color, bad compositions, and we're going to get into all that right now. Let's make some mistakes and fix them. So when you're planning your painting, the first thing you're going to do is select the paper you're going to use, your brushes, and decide what colors and the composition. But the first thing you're going to do is select your paper. There are three different types of paper here in front of you, and this is Arches hot press, Arches cold press, and this is Baohong rough. Now, if you're planning on doing some dry brushing, there is nothing better than a soft brush and rough textured paper, and I'll show you why right now. It's because you got basically you've got these bumps on the paper, the texture of the paper, and if you're painting, say, the mountain that's over here, you can start painting the mountain like this, like that, and if you want, you know, maybe there's water in front of it. There isn't in this painting, but if there's water in front of it and you want to, you know, you want to dry brush, the brush is too wet. So you can dry the brush off, but no matter how dry this brush is, it's still not going to skip over the highlights on too much. You know, there's a little bit there, but you have to be really light and make sure you're using a soft brush, and you can still get, you know, some highlights and things in there in dry brushing. You move on to this medium textured paper, or this fine grain paper, and then you can paint your mountain in here, and you can do the same thing. Come down over here, and you see already this, with the fine grain paper, is so much easier to dry brush and get these little highlights if that's what you want in your painting. But the planning of your painting starts with your selection of paper, and then if you move on, you can move on to the rough textured paper here, do the same thing, paint our mountain, and look how easy it is. I'm not even trying to dry brush here, but it's just giving you these highlights. And if you look at the effect that it's given you here, even with a really wet brush, it's still giving you the highlights that you want. And then of course you can go in, and there's nothing better, I don't think, than rough paper to blend colors on the paper with, and to watch the granulation and the texture develop like that there. But so that'll give you an understanding of the different types of paper. There's also paper that is wonderful to work with, but no, it's not. It's terrible to work with. This is cotton paper. It's recycled cotton, and I'll show you what I mean here, and I'll kind of accentuate the problem with this paper right here. So selection of your paper, number one in your painting. So let's say you're doing that mountain like that. It looks wonderful. Like that. And you can come over this way. Beautiful color. I love this color. Nice purple. And we can even drop some more color into it like this, and watch it do its thing. So you didn't want a purple mountain, you just change the color, and away you go like that. So that's all fine and dandy, but the problem is with this paper is you can't fix what you did. If you got to lift this color here, it's not going anywhere. Whereas if you're using another kind of paper, this is not necessarily cheap paper. It seems to have it just soaks up all the color, does a really good job of that, gives you a matte finish, but you can't fix it. It's done. once you're done, once you get your paint in there, it's done. You can wet it all you want. You'll pick up a little bit of it. And this is normally how you would fix an area. Try to pick it up, it just gets a little lighter. And I was using that staining purple color in there on purpose, but it really doesn't matter. If you're using a color that's not staining that normally you'd be able to lift off. This particular paper is still really hard to pick the pigment up. You see how it's just staying in there just like that. So choose your paper first, choose your texture first. Make sure you're using good quality paper. So number one, your texture. So Baohong, Arches, good paper. There's other types of paper out there that are just fabulous too that other artists use, but these are the ones that I use primarily. And if you introduce cheap paper, student grade paper they call it, you try to do anything with it and it just doesn't behave. It doesn't take color like the good paper does, but you can get away with it. If you're just testing colors or just getting gold, you can get away with it, but I don't recommend it. I recommend using good paper, and it's got two sides, the good paper. I'm sure it's expensive. Cut yourself some smaller pieces if you don't want to use too much of it. But this is what happens with the cheaper paper. All the pigment runs down here. Nothing's retained up here, pretty much. A little bit, and it's just pooling right here. I'm lucky that it stopped, but if it's not wet underneath it, it's not going to go, usually it's not going to go anywhere depending on how your angle of your table is. Alright, the next thing we're going to look at is areas you don't want pigment to go into. Now I sprayed this guy, it's still wet, this is dry over here. I'm going to try to paint the side of that building and see how we get on here. So let's see if I can get that side of the building down here. Well, that's nice there. It's given us a nice edge. But if I go over here, this is still pretty wet. We might get a little bit of a bleed going. You see, it's just diffused the edge of that building just a little bit too much. So one thing we can do is we can get down there with a dry brush, and you can see it's bleeding. It's just pretty much out of control. So you've lost control of your edge here like that. You can pick up the pigment like that. You can get a paper towel out and you can pick up the pigment with your paper towel, but as you go down, get a new piece, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, and go further in than you need. And then later on, you've actually dried that paper over here. And then so, if you use a little bit thicker pigment, use thicker pigment, doesn't tend to crawl as much, and you could make that sharp line again. So say you do, no, I don't want a sharp line. You want it wet again. Well, all you got to do is wet this area here, outside of what you've done, and if you want it, say you want to blend this top part out, let that just feed into there. You can work it a little bit, get rid of that hard edge. You still got a little bit of a hard edge there. But you can make all of this, add more pigment, and there you go. It's starting to disappear, and you're making a nice little shadow. But if you wanted to keep that, you can keep that a crisp line in there too. Or you can just bring this across again and diffuse this line all the way down. And then back to that there. If you don't like any of that, just wet it. And you can blot it, pick it up. And look how much lighter that is. You've almost picked it up. You can, they say not to rub, I don't know who they are, but don't rub it, but you can pick up a lot of what you've done, and it's almost erased. You have that little line in there too. And then that one, of course, just stayed where it was because it was dry beside it, so that's what we wanted. And now you can still, this is still wet here, you can blend on the paper. And do all that and have it come down. But anyways, that's about how to fix that problem with pigment leaching into the area you don't want it to, and correcting this line. And now that it's dry, you can still go. You can go in there again and fix your building, and it's almost like it never happened. So the next thing we're going to look at is using the wrong brush for what you want to do. So I'm going to go and paint a little bit of sky here. I'm not going to bother pre-wetting the sky. It's not good. It's just a demo. So we're not going to, this is not going to be a finished painting. This is Archer's cold pressed fine grain paper. And this is what I've chosen to continue on here. So I got a sky over here. We're going to do that. Wait a minute. What are we doing? Fan brush? No, that's terrible. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so you want to use a big kind of a mop brush for doing skies. It just helps out a lot. You can use a small round, but it's just gonna take forever because you're gonna lay down your sky wash. But if you're laying it down with a nice big brush that holds a lot of pigment, much better off. Just let it come down like that. And you're going to use the right size brush. The bigger the brush, the better, I think, for skies. You know, you can use a small brush like this, but you're going to have to really load it up every time. Get a lot of pigment on the brush, and just keep that bead moist that's coming down the page like that. And you're going to have a lot of streaks there. One brush that does work really well for skies is one that, this old one I've got is a synthetic Sable Sky Wash Series brush made in Japan. I don't even know what kind of brush it is. Had it a long time anyway. So for blending skies, it just does a really nice job because you're covering a lot of paper at the same time. A little bit dry, could have loaded it up better. And it's making a nice smooth wash, and then if you let that develop, away you go. It's going to make you know, a nice sky for you. And then of course you can use techniques. You can lift with a dry brush. You know, lift some clouds out of it. You can use a little paper towel and whatnot. But we're not about that this time. It's about making mistakes. So say you don't want this sky in there at all. Well, your friend is going to be water. There we go. So we got it wet. As long as it's wet, you can really fix a lot of this. You can spray, you know, tape it down and spray the whole thing off and just run that pigment right off. You can pick some of it up like this with a paper towel. Spray it some more. And you see where I'm spraying it. Water's coming down here. And it's actually made not a bad little background sky. And you could call that, when that dries, it's going to dry lighter, remember. So you basically, so we basically proved now that watercolor is pretty forgiving. But you know, don't get me wrong, there are staining colors out there that they're not going to let you get away with this, right? So I'm being pretty harsh on this paper, but it's good quality paper, and you know, they put up with a lot of abuse. Now of course this is staying here because it's dried into the pigment from before. You can lift this up. So say this was another mistake. You can wet it and you can work it. Let it sit for a second. Get your dry paper towel and you can blot. And then you can make those little areas lighter. But you see how I did that sky, didn't like it, I washed it off with a spray bottle. So that worked actually really well. So another really common mistake that I see is being too dry. So if you get, here's an example. Get some pigment on the brush here. I'm just going to try to dry my brush off. There, anyway, so if you're trying to do this, the edge of this building here again, up here. We're going to go down there and go here, and we're just not getting, well, there's just not enough pigment. We're running out here. Sure, you can pick up some more, but if your brush is still too dry, you know, you're doing this. And that's the number one cause, I think, of paintings that look overworked. You're just trying to save paint, or you have trouble picking up paint out of your blocks of paint, or your dried, you know, squeezed out tubes of paint. So that's why it's important to, you know, squeeze fresh paint in your palettes, and or spray, you know, spray water. I sprayed this whole palette now, and I sprayed all the wells, and I let them soften before I started even this session here. So that really works and really helps. So the other way you could paint this, to, you know, this is kind of a neat effect. This gives us some dry brushing and whatnot, so don't get me wrong there, but if you get a lot more pigment on your brush, load up your brush, roll it around in the pigment very lightly, let it soak up all the pigment, and then paint. This will look a lot better when it's down, when it's painted. And you get your crisp edge and down like that. So what this lets you do is you can keep adding to this wet area. You can change the color of the wet area and give it some variation. We can even add blues if you want to cool it down some more. Give it some shadows, let it blend on the paper. And watercolor loves to blend on the paper like this. And then you can also use, once you've done all this, you can use effects. You can splatter, you can splatter some water in there and it gives you some really neat effects. You can splatter more color in there if you want. It gives you some nice effect. Just like that. But being too dry is a really common mistake. And then you see this line, this bead that we've got going down here. Again, this is not about controlling watercolor, it's about mistakes, so I'm not going to get into this too much, but you want that color to go down this way because you're protecting something here and you don't want to make a mistake. Say you got the roof of a barn here, that you want to preserve the light color to save the color in your painting, and this is all green trees and whatnot. You can kind of bring this down. You haven't touched this wet area with that wet area. This is one of the major things you need to learn in watercolor. And as soon as you do, watch it go. There it goes. Right down the roof line. So now you've got your background of your roof and you've preserved the white of the roof. Why? Because it's dry, right? And you wet that line this way on an angle to make it go down that way. If I painted this wet line like this, it would have just come down and then followed that wet line. And sometimes you just want to make sure this doesn't get onto your painting here, and so you'll wet right off the paper, right onto if you tape your paper on like I do, it'll just run off to the tape, and then you can just pick it up right there and it'll start soaking it up. It'll soak it up, soak it up, soak it up. Or you dry your brush and pick some of it up here. All the excess pigment coming off the page like that. And the same with this one here. The best way to pick up a big blob of paint like this is have a dry brush and be patient, soak it up, dry your brush off again, got a dry brush, and pick it up like that, just like that. So it's a perfect time to show you. Sometimes I'll splatter, you've seen me do this if you watch the videos, you've seen me splatter water, just plain water into it, or you've seen me splatter, this is not the color probably to use, but you can splatter, other colors into your painting, and then you realize, oh, whoops, I just splattered myself in the face, so that's nice. That's fun. So how you clean your face is with a paper towel. So anyways, so up here, what you want to do is if you don't have any background already, you don't have to worry a whole lot about it. See how much you can get off just by blotting it like that. And then you can, this is kind of too wet here, I'll use a brush with just some clean water. And if you haven't got any underpainting there or anything you want to really be too careful with, you can just wait and just work it a little bit and blot. Don't normally rub it, hard like that. I was doing that earlier because I wanted to get all that blue off of the sky and show you what you could do. And if you wet it and work it, you're also spreading the color, so you can see it's picked up a little bit of green from the dirty water I've been using, but then go ahead and blot it. So you can see this area has recovered substantially. And then if you drop, say you drop a sky over top of that, like here, and then you run it down, well, the splatters are going to disappear. And you can even let that dry, or even while it's still wet, get a little more intense. And come down over here like that. And you can paint like a sky and a wheat field, whatever. You can convert it to whatever you want. Anyway, so it's a good way to fix that. And this is basically how I make clouds a lot of times too, is I put in the sky wash like that, and I gently lift color, just make some clouds and like that. But if you watch my videos, you would have seen how to do that anyway. So that's a way to fix splatters that are in your sky. So lastly, I just want to touch on, if you've painted a painting and you're trying to preserve your whites and it didn't happen, your whites are all gone, and usually, you know, it'll happen to me on a roof line where I'm not going to be too careful, because I know I can preserve it, or I can fix it with some white gouache. I use artist gouache titanium white made by M. Graham and Company. I've just had a couple of tubes of it for a long time, and it goes a long way because I don't use it very much. But if you use it sparingly, say you're using this to get the highlight back on the edge of the roof over here. Let's just say the roof is here. This is a little bit wet for doing this now too, because this is gouache, but it still will bleed. It still blends, and it's still, it depends how much you use, but it's still translucent like watercolor is. And then you can get some other highlights, drop them in here, and you end up with your highlights back without worrying about preserving them beforehand, right? So the other thing, I want to show you how to do smoke, because it's just so much fun. If you do a cabin or something, and you got the roof of the cabin here. This is really interesting. This is fun to really fun to do. So you got the roof of the cabin here, not the right color, but anyway, so we can do that, and we'll make a wall down underneath it. That's all going to bleed down here anyway, so I'm not concerned about that. So we got our chimney here. I'm going to use some thick pigment here to see if I can get some sort of a chimney going, like that there. So then you use this gouache and just pick up some of it and just start working it a little bit into the wet background. And you see it disperse. If you want it thicker, just lay it thicker into here. If you want to colorize it, you want some more, some grayer smoke, a little bit darker smoke, you can just add a little bit of darker areas to it like that. And now you got your chimney and you got your smoke coming out, and it's concentrated when it comes out, and it fans out. The higher it goes, and it dilutes more, and we get wet watercolor paper. It just lends itself so well to be doing this. So the reason I thought of showing you the smoke is because it's really dark in here today. It's about dinner time, so I'm going to wrap it up here, but it's we had forest fires burning west of us here that have covered us with ash and whatnot, so it's a good day to be inside, breathing the fresh air inside the house, in the studio. Thanks for watching this. I hope you've learned something to help you fix watercolor mistakes, and really it's not that hard to do, but you just need to know how. So have a great day. Thanks for watching. Thanks to all the new subscribers. It's been amazing, and I hope you enjoy the videos. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.